All right, what's up, everybody? This is Zach with another episode of EM Weekly. This week, we're going to talk about the top 10 skills for responders. And I'm talking about emergency managers. I'm talking about first responders. Like, this is just skill sets that I think will set you up for success. Honestly, this is stuff that's like been pretty helpful in my general life, and has also made me like pretty flexible and able to adapt to different situations, and honestly probably gotten me all of the jobs that I've gotten. So without further ado, we will get into this, but actually no, with ado first, we want to thank our sponsors. We'll just go ahead and play those clips real fast. Please like, subscribe, comment, give 5 stars, all of that stuff to on YouTube, on Apple, on everything. So those, when you do that stuff, you help out us by feeding the algorithm, and share it. If you find this useful or informative, please share it. Also, we have swag. This is the I'm disaster ready t-shirt, and I think it's called Army Green. You should check out our swag. And I'm also rocking my University of Vermont, Go Cats Go. They got into the tournament again this year after winning America East. Go Cats Go. And so now we're gonna go into our sponsors, and then we will, without further ado, but ado for right now. Be right back.
How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. Instinct Ready kits are awesome, compact, fully loaded, and easy to place around your office, school, campus, warehouse, wherever. I keep a quick pack in my vehicle and one at home. Imagine Instinct Ready, fully loaded Stop the Bleed kits in every school and office. Get Instinct Ready kits and training at InstinctReady.com.
Okay, we're back. Again, please like, subscribe, do all that stuff. Buy some stuff. Okay, so one of the things that I'm constantly asked, particularly by younger emergency managers coming into the field, is what kind of skills do they need? And the sort of like automatic response, I think, for a lot of folks is to tell them to go get a degree in emergency management or take tons of training and all this stuff. Not terrible advice, obviously. Like, you want to have a background in the field that you're responding to, you're going to respond in. So for instance, if you're a firefighter and you want to be a professional firefighter, like having some knowledge of firefighting is probably good. But you also can learn a lot of that stuff sort of on the job, but there's like some more broad skills that I think are very helpful. And I'll caveat that with like, one of these top 10 skills will specifically say like you need to be like an expert in some stuff. So, but in general, these are sort of like the skills that I think are the most valuable across the board. So we'll start with number 10. I tried to choose as many either goofy stock photos or funny memes to communicate this, but networking. I wish this was something someone had told me when I very, very, very first started getting into this field. You are going to have to network. Honestly, being an emergency manager is being a networker. Like, you can't do this job without being in a network. For instance, the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, that is a network of emergency management agencies and resources that are willing to share their stuff. The cliche, don't exchange business cards in the middle of a storm, which is true. Honestly, like, don't exchange business cards. I lose business cards all the time. Please just like send me a little like digital business card, or, email me and text me right off the bat. I'm not very good at keeping business cards. Although I found a pile of them from an IEM conference, like that must have been 4 or 5 years ago, that I did save for some reason. But I just found them like 2 weeks ago. So sorry to the like 50 people I took your cards from. I was probably just trying to get some free swag from your table. But the network, make friends. And the networking has been so powerful for me for numerous reasons. One is I have someone I can call for almost any situation. Like, I'm dealing with a need to plan for some disaster that I've never experienced and don't have sort of a good knowledge base in. If I don't know it, I know someone who does. Have your person. I do this not just in like emergency management in my first response life. Having a good network in real life is also very helpful. You need to fix something on your lawnmower and you don't have the tool. Know the person who has the tool if you're not going to go out and buy the tool. So network. It is really that important. Some ways that you can get good at it, go to conferences. Some of it is like, you just kind of have to learn. One thing that I learned is that I am not as important, or like people will forget me. Like, it's okay if you make a bad impression. People, I hate that saying like first impressions are everything. That is absolute nonsense. I meet tons and tons of people, and unless they absolutely blew me away on their first impression or just were so awful that I remembered I don't ever want to talk to them again, first impressions are not that important. It's much more better to sort of just show up. And show up often. So as you start to go to more conferences and go to more trainings, your network's going to just sort of naturally grow. And as you get better at the job and you get better at sort of communicating and sharing the information and knowledge that you have, and responding to disasters, the network also grows if you're out in the field. Like when you have sort of that shared experience of misery, camping not camping, but sleeping in tents, and I mean, essentially camping, not showering for a couple days, just, living in the muck and the mud, you tend to make relationships really quickly. So network. Number 10. Now coming in at number 9. Be an entrepreneur. I have been part of, I started an emergency management agency. I was the first and only full-time emergency manager there. And I had a pretty small budget, and I needed to get stuff and do stuff. So I had to become an entrepreneur. And why I say entrepreneur is like, I actually wrote a policy paper on how entrepreneurs would probably be really, really good emergency managers. They're used to being resource scarce. They have to be good at networking. They have to sort of be passionate about the job, so much so that even when it really, really sucks, you show up the next day and continue to work at it. And when everything's sort of beating you down, that you can figure it out and get yourself back up. So I think entrepreneurship is actually a really good sort of analog, skill set to emergency management. This could almost be number 1 because it like just kind of intertwines into a lot of the experience and stuff that you're going to have to build up over time. Being an entrepreneur, like trying to find money, we're not going to VCs to try to get some investors. What we're doing is probably going to granting agencies, and it's almost a harder job. Like there's no Shark Tank for emergency management, and maybe there should be. But there's a lot of times where I had these really, really good ideas or stuff that I recognized we had to accomplish, and there's no way we could afford it. Like we just, radios, for instance, radios are so expensive. One thing I ran into is we had this very large event every year, and it was surrounded by roads, and we had basically no blocking. We used to put like golf carts and like pickup trucks, but there was a period of time, like, I don't know, 8 years ago, where people were using vehicles as weapons. Like it was all of a sudden everything. Like people were running into crowds. They were driving on sidewalks, hitting people. It was just like all of a sudden everyone was like attacking each other with vehicles. And then there's just like the accident, someone accidentally steps on the gas or has a medical emergency and just plows through a crowd. That was what we were primarily worried about. And we needed a vehicle barrier system. So I was like, how are we going to do this? And I looked around and there was a lot of really good ones, but they were designed for like large cities that have basically unlimited budgets. They're just so expensive, but they work really, really well. And so I just had to get creative and figure out different ways to find funding. And I had to use like grant resources that I didn't even know existed. Got the funding and was able to do it. And actually it's been used, not just for the agency that hosted it, but also some partner agencies that needed it. So that was really cool. So be an entrepreneur, come up with creative ways. And the other thing is again, you're especially for single person shops with no budget, you're going to have to get creative. Do you have a radio? Like, do you have any way to communicate with the other agencies that you need to communicate with? If not, how do you come up with one? Like, they're very expensive. Like, a good multiband radio is like $10,000. So what else can you do? You could beg the fire department or police department to give you some radios, like the older reserve radios that they keep, or, for their rookies and their new folks that are beaters, just be like, hey, listen, like, I know these are your extras. Is there any way I could get them? And in exchange, I will help you with an exercise. Just be flexible, be knowledgeable, and like sort of how to adapt yourself to situations that, you may not know. Like, how do you build an EOC? Like, I think a lot of people just have these visions of these giant, beautiful EOCs with huge video walls, radios, everyone's got a workstation. But for most people, the executive conference room for the government, the government offices, whether it's a mayor or governor or something, can work. Like, you just need some basic stuff, and you have to be kind of thrifty. Again, I got a whole bunch of communication equipment from an IT department. I knew the IT folks really well. I treated them really well. I worked with them all the time. They liked me. I liked them. And so I kind of just begged them for stuff, and they gave it to me. And so I was able to build this really cool, like my mobile EOC, which was really just an SUV. I had everything I needed to set up an EOC in any single space that I needed. So again, just be an entrepreneur, be resourceful, adapt, overcome, excel. That's like, my mantra in everything. Number 8, don't wing the important stuff. Like, you're going to have to be an expert sometimes. And what I mean by be an expert is like, if you're an emergency manager or a first responder, whatever your specific field is, you need to know enough that in the midst of an emergency, you don't have to learn it. So those are some like basic skills. Like, that could be understanding how to sort of build the incident command system. It could be some like project management stuff. It could be, maybe your area of expertise is planning. Like, you need to be a planning expert. So I don't think you need to be an expert in everything, but whatever your sort of like specialty lane is, you need to be very, very good at that, because especially as incidents grow, at first you're going to have to do lots and lots of stuff, but as more help shows up, you're going to kind of find your lane, and you need to sort of like figure out what that lane is. And I think there's opportunities in that to sort of figure out what you want to be an expert in. I've sort of fallen into a few different areas of expertise. Radios, like communications, 100%. Like, I don't know if I'm an expert in the sense of, like, if I were to talk to probably some of the people who are listening to this podcast, they're probably going to be like, basically radio engineers. Like, there's some radio people for some reason are just like so smart on radios. Like, it is a incredibly complicated and complex, area of expertise, I guess. You can get in the weeds in a lot of different stuff, but like radios, you can get really, really into the weeds. So, but I think I'm an expert enough that like I can navigate 90% of like what I need to in the midst of a disaster. So I often fall into either radio support role or some sort of quasi radio communications. Public information was another thing. I just sort of got good at speaking. My English is gooder and my grammar is goodest. And, so, I kind of found myself into PIO stuff largely because I really was an early adopter of social media and, sort of emerging communication, techniques. I have a TikTok. It's really stupid and, a lot of the stuff is dumb, but, I know that is something that a lot of people communicate on. So if you're an emergency manager and you don't know what TikTok is, or you've never used it, I know it's probably mostly for spying on us, but it is also where hundreds of millions of people communicate every single day. And in a disaster, you might need to lean into that. I was very early on in the Twitter. So we had the VOAD, or not VOADs. What do we call those? It's been so long. We had like a hashtag for social media. Social media, it was like SMEM. I think it was social media in emergency management. Hashtag SMEM. This is, I mean, like 15 years ago or something. I can say I had the first public safety social media account in the state of Vermont. And when I worked, I went over to New York State for a little while and worked with a county over there. And I had them spun up on social media. And I just remember the first time I did a presentation on this. They were like, dude, what are you talking about? There's no way this Twitter is going to stick around. And they kind of weren't wrong. Twitter has sort of fallen apart, but it lasted, it had a good run. At least I think it's like 15 years or something. It's been going strong. And so I was I tend to be an early adopter of technology. And I remember like a couple of years later, I think I was in another course in a different environment. I was actually over back in Vermont, and one of their the emergency managers I worked with like came over and he was like, "Oh, dude, you were so right. Like we've been doing all this stuff on social media and it's been really, really good." So, I'm an expert in a few different things. Planning, which is really funny. I didn't think I'd be an expert in planning, but I sort of fell into that. I hated planning for the longest time. And then I realized emergency management is largely planning. And so I got on board. The whole kind of shut up and color sometimes, it actually can be valuable. When someone's like, "Hey, you just have to do this," and then you do it, you're like, "Oh, cool. All right. This is actually useful." So I'm not saying, again, don't be an expert on everything. That's just impossible. But find a few lanes of expertise and then try, if you can, figure out like within your team or your team of teams, where the areas in need are, especially if you're a new emergency manager. If you can do something that nobody else on the team can, you are immediately elevated into the higher echelon, because there's always going to be someone who's like, "Hey, do we have someone who's spun up on X?" And if you happen to know X, guess what? You're the expert. You're the boss. You get to move into a position of power. So, don't wing the stuff that's really, really critical. Be an expert in that. But then also be flexible and get around. All right. Number 7. Oh my gosh. This is like a landmine. Take care of yourself and make sure that so that you can take care of everyone else. And that is through wellness. And wellness is sort of like one of those words that's like very sort of amorphous, nebulous, whatever you want to use as the turn of phrase. Wellness in the way that I'm talking about it, there's mental health, there's physical health. If you're religious or just sort of like need some sort of like higher power or otherwise, like spiritual health, like you can get spiritual health through other stuff as well, but like just sort of like that moral guidance and like keeping the ship upright. Whatever, they call this sort of like holistic wellness or in the military, this is something that's really, really pushed heavily, or has been recently, and for a long time wasn't. I got super, super burned out on a job and basically was like, I'm never working in emergency management again. I hate it. And it was because I was not taking care of myself. I worked way more hours than I should have. I was sacrificing sleep. I was sacrificing, most importantly, like time with my family. I can't even tell you how many events and stuff that I had to like leave, or I was on the phone the entire time. And, your kids don't understand that. Your spouse may sort of understand that, but it's not a healthy way to live. And then when we're so busy, we're not taking care of ourselves physically, like it all sort of like compounds, and then eventually like you snap. And that can be snapping in a simple way where, you kind of just are like, I quit the job. I don't want to do it anymore. Or it can be catastrophic, up to and including suicide. Like there are suicides in this field. There's certainly suicides in first response. And so you have to take care of yourself. And I practice what I preach. This is not something, like meditation is actually really, really helpful sometimes. Like, especially, I think one of the things that I think is really, really hard with wellness is that people think these results are going to happen really quickly. This stuff takes a long time, years in some cases. Some other stuff that I did, I had started to cut back on caffeine. There's like the drugs of an EOC, caffeine and nicotine. Like you have so many people that are just like surviving off of cigarettes and coffee. I can't even tell you how many emergencies I've responded to where I'm like, have you eaten a meal? And they're like, not in a while. Sleep is incredibly important. So I started cutting back caffeine in the afternoon, and I started kind of figuring out, like, I didn't know how to sleep. Like, I know that sounds stupid, but you could become an expert in sleep, look it up, Google it. There's techniques, having like your room set up properly, not drinking caffeine, not drinking alcohol right before you go to sleep. I was a prolific mouth breather and a snorer. I didn't know this. And then I found out because my wife was like, dude, you got to fix this. And I know this sounds crazy, but look this up afterwards. I'm not crazy. Mouth taping. I have slept so much better since discovering that I could just tape my mouth shut. And I know that sounds really, really weird, but I promise you, if you look it up, you will be shocked to find out that this can have a profound effect on the amount of sleep. I didn't have dreams for years. I never slept through the night for years. I'm talking like over a decade. Take care of your PTSD. Like if you have, a lot of sort of stressors from traumatic incidents and you need to talk to someone, go do that. Don't put that off. That stuff does not get better with time. If anything, it gets worse with time. All this stuff, like your healthcare, all of your health gets worse with time. I'm sort of fortunate in that I'm held to a physical standard for one of my jobs. So I have to take care of myself to a degree, but it doesn't have to be complicated. Figure out some sort of cardio. It could be HIIT exercises. It could be running. I've been running a lot. I run like 3 miles every other day. And then one thing that I found was like, I don't like going to the gym, and I also tend not to find time to go and do full, like long exercises. I usually can run in the morning, but I can't do like lifting and stuff. So I keep weights in my office, and I did this when I work from home now, but I did this when I worked in regular office jobs too. I kept a kettlebell because the kettlebell is like this very useful, like you can use it for a lot of different things. You can do cardio, it's weight. You can do some flexibility stuff. It's dynamic movement. Like right now, these are fairly light, but they're just 20-pound weights. Just keep those right by you. There's some psychology to this. One of the ways to sort of start getting into an exercise routine is to actually just put your exercise clothes at the end of your bed, on the floor, like set up so that when you wake up in the morning, you have to like step over it to start your day. And it's just a mental reminder, like, oh yeah, I should probably just put these shoes on and go for a run. And again, really, really important to take care of yourself. This job can be very, very demanding. And there's nothing that I find more depressing, and it's happened a few times in my career, where you have someone who is either about to retire or just retired and they drop dead of a heart attack. Or, have a stroke or get, job related cancer, because they're not taking care of themselves. And that's not to put blame on them. There's lots of stuff that can cause that. But these folks specifically, I knew had major health issues because they were not taking care of themselves. And, so yes, get sleep, drink tons of water, eat, good food, exercise, anything in moderation. Like I enjoy beer and bourbon, so I'm going to have some drinks. But I've cut back a lot. We try not to drink during the week. We try to keep that to the weekend. And coffee, I drop, coffee. Caffeine is like the number one used drug in the world. And it can be a great booster. It can kind of get you through, times when you need that little extra boost, but it's also terrible when you need to go to sleep. And don't offset this stuff with like supplements and vitamins and stuff. Like that's great. Like you should take those if you need them, but that's not a solution to like not taking care of yourself. All right, moving on. Number 6, be a critical thinker. I cannot tell you how many times we have this, like there's the sunk cost fallacy, right? Like someone who's so invested in an idea or concept or they're going down this path that they refuse to change course. And a lot of that has to do with ego. We all have ego. We also all have our own biases, whatever it is. We look through stuff through our own lens, and we have these like predetermined judgments on like people and things and ideas. And that can get you into a lot of trouble, and you can course correct, right? Like that's the other thing, like being a critical thinker, use your data. Like you can trust your gut if you have nothing else to rely on. But as an emergency manager or first responder now, like we are data saturated. We have so much data. And so there's really no reason to be like, well, I think this is what's happening. And the other thing, like, I think, well, people are like, well, my training and my experience, like I know how stuff works. That's data, right? That is actually useful data. So in lieu of other data, yes, you can use your training and experience and knowledge to certainly get through a situation, but supplement that as soon as you can. Like, as a firefighter, like I learned to read smoke. And so I got really good at sort of understanding, like, what is the situation that's going on inside this building before I got there. But I can also use a lot of like really cool tools. Like you have thermal imaging cameras, you have, now there's all sorts of like environmental data, points that you can collect as you're moving through a structure to figure out, like what the atmosphere is like, what's the temperature like. You can see through the smoke. Like there's all this really cool stuff now to make you a better firefighter. That's not to say that the firefighters back in the day who just had to, the smoke eaters that had to go in and do the job, like their training and experience kept them alive. But you can be much, much better at it. Same with emergency management, right? Like know how to use weather data, know where to access this stuff, and don't be afraid to use it. In fact, I think this is another area that for some of us, like that because there's so much data, we sometimes take for granted that communicating that data can actually help us in our job. So for instance, when you're trying to communicate to someone that they need to evacuate because of a major, we'll say the atmospheric river situation that California is facing right now, just rain, nonstop rain, whether it's a hurricane, whatever. Trying to explain to them using sort of raw data why they need to do this is not going to resonate. One of the best public information campaigns I've ever seen, the most effective way of communicating floods I've ever seen, I think it was like 6, maybe 7 years ago. The Weather Channel had their augmented reality presentation where they were explaining like, hey, you need to evacuate. This storm is going to cause this much, the storm surge is going to be this, plus the rain, the flooding. You need to leave. And they had a person standing like on a street corner and they showed the water rising up. And then they showed that when this is done, it is going to be over your head. Your house is going to be underwater. You need to leave. And I believe there was a research. I'm like, now I'm drawing a blank. I'm pretty sure I read the research paper following that so many people like saw that and were like, oh my gosh, like this makes perfect sense. And that's not just for, evacuations and stuff. Like when you're going after grants, like being able to communicate, you have the data, where your vulnerabilities are, you've done your HVAs, you've done your THYRAs, but having like a raw chart is not maybe the best way to sort of communicate this. This is even more important when you're talking to people who aren't necessarily in the field. So when you're communicating to like your political leadership or your agency partners, we have this bad habit of using I just did it. Your HVA, hazard vulnerability analysis, all of these sort of like acronyms that we use, ICS, like we throw ICS around in all these conversations, but it's very common that, especially when I'm talking to non-emergency people, that they're like, have this glazed over look like, what is ICS? Is that like an illness or something? So communicating data and information in a way that is like digestible for everyone. Because if you're not doing that, like if you assume that everyone speaks the same language as you and communicates in the same way as you and understands data in the same way as you, you are going to fail. So get really, really good at visualizing data. So that means also learning how to do, run multimedia systems. Like, do you know how to use Photoshop? Do you know how to use Adobe Illustrator? Do you know how to do video editing? Do you know how to do audio editing? Like these are skills that are not like nice to haves anymore. You have to get spun up on this. I can promise you that in an emergency, if you're trying to communicate a lot of information in a very, very short period of time, like visually can be very, very much more effective. Audio could be much more effective. And trying to hit all of your different audiences. You're going to have people who don't speak your language. You're going to have people who have like functional needs where maybe they can't see or they can't hear or they have trouble processing information in certain ways. Like the more sort of ways that you can take complex information and break it down into digestible forms, the better off you're going to be. I mean, honestly, that's like $1 million skill set. Like anyone who can do that effectively, again, you're right up at the top. Number 4, paper is dead. Long live paper. You're going to have to get techie. I'm so sick of people who are like, when it all fails, we're going back to paper. Sure. I can't remember the last disaster where I operated solely off paper. Like and I'm not saying don't have it as a backup, don't be proficient, don't be ready, but like this is a technological industry. We are, again, as we're talking about data, your incident management systems can ingest crazy amounts of data streams. You as a emergency manager, I'm going to tell you some skill sets you have to have in the future. Like you're just going to have to. GIS, geospatial information systems, mapping, you have to get good at that. That is like everything. And it's expected, when FEMA's getting their damage, when you're trying to get declarations or you're trying to get reimbursement, having geo-referenced data, so like photos aligned with some coordinates with good metadata and the information attached to it that you're trying to communicate is much better than a arbitrary picture that you don't really know where it's at. And you say, well, this road is damaged. Okay, where on this road is this damage? What is this? When you say the building is destroyed, sure, you can do your dashboard assessment and you're driving around and you're like, that building's destroyed, that building's damaged. But if you can provide, geo-rectified aerial imagery or just a cell phone picture with some coordinates on it, that is light years ahead of how we're really mostly currently operating. And I think by default, emergency managers kind of get lumped with all of these like peripheral skills that like aren't necessarily in the realm of like first responders. Drones started in public safety and emergency management. Like we were using them before other agencies. I think we've sort of now been surpassed. Like fire departments and police departments are using drones for a lot of really cool stuff and they're very proficient with it. But that also means like, where we used to maybe get feeds into our EOCs of like just mostly radio communications and then like a couple, maybe like an update into your web EOC or something. Now you can stream live video from a, fire department drone. Maybe it's tethered and it'll be up there all day. And that's a hugely valuable piece of information, especially in an EOC where like you're so disconnected that sometimes you can't really tell what's happening out in the field. But like understanding how all this stuff is connected and how to use it is really important. So that's great. All right. So this drone will fly around. It'll send a feed, but you need to know how to access that. Is that like some sort of API from the software that we need to then connect to something else? Is it just a address that you need to log into and then somehow figure out how to get it up on the screens? Even an EOC, a modern EOC is an incredibly technologically heavy environment. We were really lucky. We got to go to Orlando, Florida's emergency operations center. We were down there. And Manny, the emergency management director, was showing us around. I mean, they had cameras everywhere for they could push one button based on the type of event that's going on. And they'd have all the cameras that they need in that area, all the communication systems. It was a really, really, really nice setup. Very, very clean and very thoughtful. And you could tell that he was like very proficient in all of this stuff. It made him a professional. If you don't know this stuff and you're put into any emergency management position, like you have to know this stuff now. It's not nice to have anymore. Like technology is our job. So get really, really good at it. If you've ever had to work in alert and warning, like trying to understand how mass notification works, how you're plugged into IPAWS, how the EAS and WEA work within IPAWS, how you have to understand like throttling of phones so that you don't destroy your phone network in an area, the bandwidth that's required to do this stuff, like all of these like pieces of data that before you took so for granted. It's yours now. Like you have to understand this stuff. And everything is only going to get more complicated. AI, like understand AI. You want to be an expert in something, figure out AI, all the resources that are available in AI. ChatGPT is a godsend. I don't care what anyone says. That system is so awesome. When you're just trying to like, in the middle of a situation, you're like, these are the things I'm trying to communicate. Why can't I make a sentence out of it? You could be like, hey, ChatGPT, please give me a quick description of a, whatever scenario based on these parameters. So, the situation you're facing. You know what you're trying to communicate, but like in the middle of a disaster, sometimes like you don't have the creative bandwidth to sort of write, something, a prose about a flood threat. So use these tools. The beauty of AI and technology is that it can also augment you. I had built up all of our technology in my last full-time emergency management, like public sector job, to augment me. So I could hit one button based on the type of incident. We used a incident management software called Noggin, and I had it all programmed. So if I said that the incident was this level, and for instance, there was a fatality involved, when I click send in the back end, it was going, all right, because this incident is this level, I need to send out notifications to these folks. And then they know their assignment based on some pre-planned stuff that we did. And then because there's a fatality, I knew that these people had to be notified specifically of that. And then because of like some minor scripting type stuff that's happened on the back end, it would pull information from my initial report and automatically build an email, a text message, and a phone call to them. And then I would get a response that said, hey, I'm en route, or I'm unavailable, or whatever. So as an emergency manager now, I basically immediately have a picture of who's coming, who's been notified, and what resources I know I'm going to be short on. The logistics guy can't make it in, so now I need to call up, my other logistics person, and she's, a couple towns over. So I need to plan for a little bit longer of a run. So again, use that technology. Lean into it. It's our career. Like whatever, you can be a Luddite if you want to, but you're not going to last much longer in this field if you don't get spun up on this stuff. It is what it is. Number 3, planning. Plan to plan and then write plans about the plans you plan to plan. Planning is honestly like that's all we do. We have to plan. And planning is a lot of different things. So I also think of planning as like the project management side. So there's kind of 2 worlds of planning that like most emergency managers are working in. There's project management, trying to plan your daily tasks, trying to plan your long-term efforts, trying to plan for systems and upgrades and like how you're going to get better. Just doing planning all the time. Like this is the nature of the work. I also sort of lump in like planning, I like assessing and like the whole sort of planning cycle in this. So like, knowing how to, take a area where you're unfamiliar and then familiarize yourself with it and then become really good at it. That's like a plan, right? At its most basic form. You do your HVA, you write your plans, and then you build your training and exercising to sort of figure out, do these plans work? Is everyone sort of in line with these plans? And then you start the cycle over. So, just get used to planning. I used to fight this so much. And I think it's because I sort of came from a first response world where I was just so tactically driven, like go put the wet stuff on the red stuff. Like that was like, we didn't really need to do much more planning than that. Like fire alarm goes off, you show up in a truck, you go inside, you end that fire, you go back outside, you go back to the station. And that's not to say there isn't tons of strategy and everything behind that, but it's just much more tactical. And in a lot of cases, when you're in emergency management, you got to be much more strategic, and strategic in a way that you understand the tactics, but that you are sort of planning for like that 30,000 foot. I think a lot of emergency managers, especially like single person shops, city, local municipality type of shops, campuses, like localized campuses, you can get really, really, you sometimes can't see the forest through the trees. And I think the planning process sort of helps you back out and think about these things. Because if you're just constantly putting out fires, whether they're figurative or literally, you can't sort of identify the other things that you're maybe letting go. And we get really good at these like high probability, low consequence events. And then we forget about the low probability, high consequence events. And so just like keeping those things on track, and that's part of your planning process. I also think you should have a long-term plan, like looking out, 5 to 10 years, plan that whole process, because by doing that, you can essentially, you put a lot of work in initially, and then you kind of go in cruise control. It's all maintenance after that, right? Like you may adjust based on like something that happens and you realize like, oops, like this is a skill set we didn't have, or a disaster we didn't prepare for, or know that it was going to be something we'd have to deal with. But like, that's why a really good emergency operations plan, like a comprehensive plan, can drive the ship for a very long time. And then you can use your annexes and other sort of like specialty, tactical style plans to build off of that. But like having those long-term guidance, like just something to aim for. And then again, assess. You have to assess in order to plan. Like you can't just arbitrarily plan. That's just so terrible. It's a waste of time. And I know it happens all the time. People just run exercises. We have to do a relocation exercise. Okay, have you done all of the stuff that leads up to this? Do you even know what you need to do in order to have a relocation and reunification plan? These are skills. This is part of that process. So when I say planning, I'm talking about comprehensive planning. But yeah, be able to assess, find a standard. I really like NFPA 1660 now. It used to be 1600, but 1660 now combines their emergency management, continuity of operations, and the ASHER, active shooter hostile event response plans, all into one guideline. I just think it's like easy to use. Anyone, you can read it online for free, use it for free online. I think the old one used to have I haven't actually looked to see if there was an assessment matrix that you could get. I would run that a couple times a year just to see like if we're, still spinning our tires or making progress. EMAP is like the golden standard. And I think it's really good to sort of go towards. It's the emergency management accreditation program. It's a lot of work. Like most of the agencies that are EMAP accredited have someone that like basically that's part of their job is just maintaining that accreditation. But maintaining the accreditation also means like you're doing all the stuff to make sure that you can get reaccredited or get accreditation in the first time. So again, assess, plan, execute. I think that's enough on number 3. Number 2, create and innovate. I like literally like there's no disaster formula. And as all the stuff that I talked about before, which is like very sort of like structured, right? Like stuff that you can sort of work towards to make better. You're going to get sideswiped at some point and just be like, whoops, I had no idea this was going to happen. And I think for a lot of, especially new emergency managers, they're like, no matter what, I have to use ICS. No, you don't. You actually don't ever have to use ICS. That is, it's nice because a lot of people understand it, basically. It doesn't solve problems, though. ICS is a tool. It is not a solution. So whatever works, in some cases, you're going to have to wing it. I worked a lot with nonprofits and like VOADs and like the religious organizations that respond to disasters. And a lot of them don't use ICS at all, right? And they're very like fluid because you may have a volunteer for a couple days and then you have another volunteer and they might have to move spaces and people are sort of like, they're not full timers. So like some people, this might be their first time ever being at a disaster. You have to be creative in how to use them. The other thing is like going back to the entrepreneur thing, like you have to innovate. Like there's going to be times where you don't have funding or knowledge or experience in something. You've got to figure it out. And maybe no one does, right? If no one has this, that's actually kind of cool. Like you get to be the first person. You get to set the standard from then on for this issue. So I fought tooth and nail. I was like, you know what? I'm a single person shop. I need a vehicle. Like most of my stuff, I'm like, I want to be in the field. Like I know that's not emergency management 101, but I needed to build a whole bunch of experience and network really, really quickly. And the best way to do that was to support the fire department and police department and ambulance on scene and with whatever they needed. And it worked out amazing in my situation. Maybe it won't work out in every situation, but I was able to use every single little mini disaster to break all of my stuff and then come up with better ways of doing it. And so I got to be very innovative and very creative. And this is not just in the disaster realm. You also need to do this in your personal realm, part of the wellness thing. Be creative. One of the things I figured out as I was burning myself to the ground and just being so depressed and mad and like just frustrated was that I had lost a whole bunch of stuff that I used to do. I used to be very creative. I did a lot of video work. I did lots of audio work. I like to draw. I like to make music, all of this stuff. And I was like, oh, when was the last time I just like kind of sat down and read a book that was not a nonfiction, reference manual? And it had been a really long time. And honestly, like I basically killed the creative part of my brain. And when I left, I remember thinking like, this is a good thing that I'm leaving, because I don't think I can make this agency any better right now. Like, I just don't have the bandwidth to make it better. I'm just doing what I have to do to get through the day. I think had I sort of found a creative outlet where I could have, thought about stuff in a different way. I mean, these are like, this is how you get your synapses firing. Like the stuff that like disconnects, like being creative and innovative is not something that, again, this is not nice to have. Like, you should build this into your day. As an emergency manager, figure out maybe in every morning for an hour, you're reading a book that is just like kind of disconnected from your world. Sit and just be quiet. Like, don't do stuff for like, this is like a lost art, right? Like meditating or just sitting and not thinking about anything, one thing I figured out sort of towards the tail end and it helped was I'm not a like prisoner, right? I can leave my office. There's like, no one's going to stop me. And so I started walking, downtown, and I would sit in downtown Burlington and just kind of like hang out and people watch on my lunch, like just sit there, it was fun. It was nice. It was nice to get outside. And, if I needed to be back, I could be back very quickly. But I would just kind of sit there and vegetate, relax. And then I'd go back and I was fully recharged for the afternoon, and I would get a whole bunch of stuff right after lunch. Lunch is usually when you're dead, and it's because you're like, haven't left your office. So find that creative outlet, whatever it is. And being innovative is also, again, it's a way of standing out. Think of solutions in innovative ways. So for instance, are you good at public speaking? If you're not, take a comedy class, take an improv class, like put yourself in a situation that you've never been in before, where you have to be creative and thoughtful and sort of think on your feet. That's a skill set that I know I've talked about this probably ad nauseum at this point, but stand-up comedy made me probably was the best professional development that I ever did. Because I can sit here and talk to a camera for 45 minutes about stuff that I've prepared. I did prepare. I actually took lots of notes, and I put a slideshow together, which I hope you all appreciate. But a lot of this is just like, I'm thinking on the fly as I'm talking about this stuff. And that is a skill set that you develop in stand-up comedy. And then framing is another thing that I think is really, really important when you're talking about stuff, is like being able to sort of frame a situation for your audience. And leading, I actually kind of jumped the gun on this one. So the number one skill, communicate. It's like almost everything that we do is communication to some degree, right? Like when you're doing presentations on life safety skills, that's communicating. When you're networking, that's communicating. When you're on the radio, that's communicating. Being able to communicate, I'll give a shout out to Prescott, my buddy who's a PIO, and he's been on a couple podcasts. I think he was on John's not all that long ago. Prescott Nadu, he uses this term, right message, right format, right audience, like, right time. Like these are, I'm sure it's a PIO term, but like he really like hits home, like communicate in the way that your audience is going to receive it. And so that means like being able to do graphic design. Like I can't tell you how many emergency management documents look like this drawing. And for those of you who can't see it, just Google graphic design is my passion, and you will see a whole bunch of these examples. But don't use understand design elements. It's so important. One of the things that John Scardina, the CEO of this company, Doberman Emergency Management, sort of talks about is like, we're almost a design company that does emergency management. It's so like, we lean into it so much because it's so important. Because it conveys authority, it conveys professionalism. It clearly communicates when you can clearly communicate information. That wins. There was a recent. So I've been working with my local school district as a volunteer, and I was going through a bunch of the state documents, and there's this poster that they have for. I think it's like one of those posters to say like, call this number. It's 100% anonymous, and you can report a threat or some sort of like life safety thing and there's no consequence. Like this is just a tip line. And the poster was unreadable. And I was like, I know because I have a design background that if I were to print that out, it would be even more unreadable. If I can't read it on my screen in a printed format, it's useless. The fonts were terrible. The color combination was like terrible. There was no contrast. So visually it stinks, but you also have to remember, like, you are responsible for communicating to all of your constituents, which means that you have people who are going to have ways that they are taking in information that if you are neglecting them, you are failing as an emergency manager. So if somebody is colorblind, like, and you're not designing to have like high contrast so that you can help folks out to see this stuff, or looking at other mediums, because not everyone can, see or hear 100% or at all. So how do you communicate with those audiences? How do you communicate with neurodiverse folks who are going to interpret data differently than, maybe you or I? And how do you do that? You talk to these folks, bring them into the planning process, and ask them, when I'm communicating this important information, what's the best way for you to receive this? You don't have to be the expert at anything. And I'm going to tie this all in. Use your network, right? Like, you should be building a diverse network so that you can, have someone to call for any situation. So again, communication is everything that you're doing, like all of your mass notification. You want to say, like, emergency managers, like, if you want to pat yourself on the back and say that you have helped, keep people alive, you're probably going to be doing that through your mass notification system, or by providing really important information to folks so that they can make their own decisions. And the way that you're going to do that is by being really, really good at communicating and understanding that how your message comes across through different mediums. I'll give you a really good example. So when Tropical Storm Irene hit Vermont, Vermont had basically limited broadband cable access, right? Like, there was just a lot of people didn't have internet, and a lot of people still don't have internet. And one of the things that I remember seeing early on was, the state's trying to get this information out, life-saving information, as well as like information to like safeguard the environment and your property and roads and stuff. And it wasn't reaching the audiences because they had no way of getting it. There was no TV. There was no, maybe there was radio if they had a radio, but there was no internet in a lot of places because it had been destroyed. The infrastructure was down. And so towns got smart and they were like, oh, well, we will just start to post this on the cork boards outside of our general stores, because everyone's going to the general store because they need to, get their food and milk and bread and all that other stuff that you get in a disaster. And because people had nothing else, in some communities, they were completely cut off and stranded. They could go down to the cork board and they were reading what was there. And there was information on how to get help, what numbers to reach, when the meetings were going to be. And that was the other thing, like public meetings. Like, you have people that are not comfortable being online. And sometimes like getting them into a room and talking to them like a human being is the best way to do that. And in fact, just in general, like, don't just rely on one format. Like, again, you're listening to me via audio, maybe via video, and this is great. But I would love to talk to all of you in person, and sort of have these discussions, and then you could sort of better understand the context of what I'm talking about, because you can ask the questions and everything. So yeah, I think that's our number one. That's number one. My voice is kind of going. Otherwise I would do my like broadcaster voice, but number one. And then the bonus, I think, being good at lots of stuff is also, you're an emergency manager. You kind of have to be good at everything. And that means you're going to be a generalist. Semper Gumby is the term that we often use. And so being good at lots of things and having the tools available to do lots of things is good. Again, be an expert in a few things, be really good at a lot of things, and you will be much more valuable. I hope this is helpful. I would be shocked if everyone made it this far. I hope you did. If you did, please like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. I have upgraded my recording system. I'm using a new system, and I hope it helps. And so give me some feedback. Did you like this episode? Are there things that you would like to add to this list? I would love to know. Like, what do you think your top 10 skills are? We can add to them. So go to the comments, comment, communicate, talk to each other. If you're doing this on your own podcast, tag me. I want to know. So visit our site, visit our sponsors, and I will see you next week.